And that just does that automatically somehow?
Yeah.
By magic? Some magic you made?
Yeah, there's at the very bottom here, there's a stream key.
And okay, you take that from... I was looking for that the other day. I looked everywhere on the website, I couldn't find it.
Yeah, you have to...
It's well hidden.
It is very... but you scroll down there, you stick it in settings, and it just links it whenever you hit stream.
Thank you. So we're streaming now.
There we go.
And I don't need to record here?
It'll upload it to YouTube whenever you hit stop stream. So.
Okay, so in order to share that, I can just copy that URL, can I?
No, it's...
It says go live, is it not live?
No, it's definitely live.
It's live, yeah. So...
Where is it? There is a share...
You've had a bit of an early start then. It's alright.
Where was it? I found it yesterday, fairly easy.
The summer is great though because the sun rises so early.
It's not that, is it?
Late, but it was winter, but now it's great. Well, I think we should
stream options.
Work a bit more with the seasons. I think our bodies
fine. I think you just copy this URL because I'm pretty sure. No, you don't do that, do you?
Winter, we should not.
Can I leave that with you?
Oh, there it is.
Oh, right.
That's the link there.
Okay, thank you.
No worries.
Superb.
By far, I feel like I'm asleep now.
Oh, Liz, is Susie about yet?
She will be here, but I haven't seen her yet.
I found out about that recently, and I emailed Karlyn because he was selling his sound devices. Yes. And I thought, oh, I'll see if he'd like to sell it to me. He put it on eBay, and I didn't enough. But no, through that, we started having a little email conversation because he said it might take me out in the field and do some. No. He's yeah. The thing about the discussion, it's unique.
Everyone's happy to stream today.
And it was really good. And do I need to rework it? You know, talk to me. Yeah. And since there was room alone. And you get a little stuff on this script. Don't touch it, it's good. So when we're splitting it, my kind of stuff. There's a meeting in July. There's a meeting next Saturday. Yeah. You wait. Yeah. Well, it's a relief to me because I'm playing something, so they won't look at it like I'm telling you about it. Not just my latent self-promotion.
Just so you know, everybody, we are live streaming now. So if you say, you know, I'm just letting you know because
so the bit about latent self-promotion's just gone out to the whole
yeah, if you want to promote any events, that's totally. This is the camera.
I'm bigging Karlyn up. I'm not bigging me up.
Excellent.
Yeah,
Okay, so the audio capture.
It's just the nature of the beast, isn't it?
It was with that.
Hello. Okay.
Morning. Average now once a year. Occasionally goes to very occasionally. Almost almost
That's all right. Yes. Let's make a 9:30 start after a really packed day and a late night. That will work brilliantly.
I was so tired last night. I was back to the hotel and yeah, said that the tree was up and got into it. Yes, that was.
Did you travel as well yesterday?
Yes, yeah, I got up at I drove last night to my friend's place near Nottingham. So I drove at midnight, and then I got up at 7 and drove here for the morning. So it was only an hour and a half. I still got up. I got up at 6:45 and just ran out. Just don't start faffing.
Yeah, yeah. Okay.
You're right. I know, yeah.
Oh, wow.
Win the award of best shoes review.
Actually, yeah. There are lights in them as well. They're not charged.
They explode with glitter and
Yeah.
fireworks every midnight.
Yeah, they're all along. But they're not charged. They are. They just randomly switch on the buttons inside the shoes. So.
Just switch it on
Well, that's what I have with this
Notice
I just happen to like bright coloured things. It just so happens that other people look at bright coloured things. I don't like the attention, which is why I don't have the lights up at all.
My middle son, his favourite colour is pink, like forever. He had this pink jumpsuit at times. Say, oh, that's pink, Adam. It's my favourite colour. He said to this woman in the post office one day, it's my favourite colour and I love makeup. Like that. The woman was like looking at me.
I have a friend in Edinburgh whose son goes to school on the non-uniform days because it's a character called the Golden Princess. And we said think it's like a dress and everything. And yeah, he loves it. So my friend was like, oh, I'm not going to say it.
Not that long time at school.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think we should probably make a start to avoid running everything late. I just wanted to give people a bit of an extra chance to get here. So we have got the sound bit later on. We've started the Padlet, and Pam has written an amazing number of publications and things to think on there.
Sorry, I wasn't asleep. I just couldn't get on. I don't know what's happened to my laptop. It's not connecting to anything, even when I was at the hotel. So I managed to set.
When we have a break, I will do a mini thing and check. It's all working.
No, I don't think it's you. I think it's something that I don't know. Something switched on. We'll see.
Write on the whiteboard and then we'll put it on the tablet.
Yeah, let's do it the old crazy talk then. So 9:30 in the morning.
For Q&A later as well, or we can use this for this. So if you have something you want to put on the Padlet, either stick it on here or write it on here, pass it on, like the yarn from yesterday, pass it on.
I almost wore it, actually.
Yeah.
I considered wearing it as a massive bracelet to, you know, I don't know. Too much.
It was the festival yesterday. You would have been fine, wouldn't you? You could take straight or anything. So, it's my great pleasure to welcome Karlyn King, PhD in musicology, to talk about vinyl records and male stereotype. Is this medium of music gendered? I think a lot of people are very interested in this paper, which is why you're first, to motivate everyone to get here. I think we got about half maybe this Sunday, and the rest are people watching. Hello to people. We are streaming. We're on Twitter. If you have comments and questions, I'm going to be a bit more relaxed today, so I can follow those on Twitter. So if you're watching, you can tweet inclusive sound with a hashtag in front, and I will follow that to see if you've got any questions, and we can start to integrate that a little bit better today as well. Okay.
Thank you very much. Thanks for coming down first as well. I know it was a busy day yesterday. I'm really sorry I couldn't be here. So yeah, this is what I'm going to talk about in the next 20 minutes. So why am I researching vinyl? Someone asked me, why are you researching something that died out with the dinosaurs? It's not quite that old. But yeah, why is this relevant in 2017? I'm going to talk about a few key concepts that I've been researching within sort of the framework of gender. Something known as the male listening room, the sort of domestic war that emerged from this, and something called the listening bias, which is actually unfortunately still very prevalent today. And then a sort of more abstract philosophical context of the neutral receptacle in terms of storage container technology related to musical format. And then sort of a bit about today, you know, where are we at now in the year 2017, and then conclude. So why vinyl, why now? So this is a really old statistic from 2004, which showed that only 18% of the Record Collectors Guild poll were female. So I have approached them and asked for an up-to-date statistic, which they've not given me yet, so I'm really, really interested to see, has that moved? But I'm going to look at a few things today that might suggest that it probably hasn't, and it's not because women aren't collecting or buying vinyl, it's because they're not comfortable in these sort of male, all boys clubs, if you like. So Will Straw said that music is an immaterial being that comes to us through material formats. So who here buys vinyl records, for instance? Yeah. Okay. Do you own a turntable? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Bit of research there. Yeah. So we interact with music through these sort of physical formats. And in December 2016, vinyl actually outsold digital downloads for the first time ever. So we're living in a very different time. And 2016 was also the year that vinyl album sales made more money for British artists than the dominant streaming model. So also the biggest selling home entertainment system on Amazon is the sort of low-end turntable, like the sort of Crossley ones that are sort of under £100. They all have a USB connector, so you can put your MP3s on it as well as play vinyl records. So vinyl is definitely back. I don't think there's any arguing with that. However, what I've found is that there's always been very much a gender bias in that this is something that's sold to men as opposed to sort of women and girls. And, you know, I can throw out stereotypes like movies like High Fidelity, for instance. The Nick Hornby book is very much about men interacting with vinyl. You're running a vinyl store, and women are always sort of on the fringes in that movie. So I thought I would just introduce that as a sort of context. So historically, it's argued that high-end sort of sound technology was not masculinized so much until after World War II. So the predominantly male soldier force were given electronics training. Sound technology played a huge part in the Second World War. Unfortunately, the Nazis got there first in terms of using it. But yeah, in terms of how it's been developed, after the war it was very much sold to men because they had been interacting with it mainly. And these are some real life adverts from High Fidelity magazine in 1957. And it's very clear that, you know, there's very much a sexist rhetoric at play. So my favourite one, What Shall We Do with the 10-Year-Old Ladies, depicts a very heteronormative couple. The man wanted to go and buy technology, and the women wanted to go, hat shopping. So yeah, and stuff like hi-fi manship, you're our kind of guy, all this blah blah blah. But people were really aware of this in the 50s as well. It's not like there was a sort of, oh, it's just the way things are. I mean, this person in 56 said that men bulldoze the opposite sex into the belief that they can't possibly understand the workings of this complicated equipment. As time went by, men were happy that audio interests had taken on aspects of a secret fraternal organisation in which women were barred. So yeah, the male listening room was sold as a place where a man, a very sort of heteronormative, typically white man, would go into this room, use this high-end technology, and get peace and quiet from the wife and kids, basically. That's how it was sold. And you only have to dig out copies of this magazine to see that that was very much the open argument. So this led to what we might call domestic war. This picture here is a real advert from the 50s, selling Fidelitone needles, so the sort of more high-end needle for your turntable. And as you can see, they're depicting, the wife, destroying the records with their heels. I've had enough of this. This is a distraction, worse than football. Yeah, and women were very much depicted as not interacting with this at all. They were depicted as tasteless, unable to enjoy music, certainly not loud music. And these are quotes from 1949. One particular writer said, do women really enjoy it? Do they really listen to music? Is music a part of their experience because it's thought-provoking and soul-satisfying? Or merely because it comes out of a blonde cabinet and this adorns the domestic premises? Women did respond to this, so that the quote below is a response from a female reader who argued this is not about sex or gender or anything, it's about music and what your preference. But yeah, this very, very open rhetoric was extremely prevalent. Tom Perchard at Goldsmiths has done a paper, it's not out yet, but I've been lucky enough to see it, and it's a diary project where he's been scouring diaries of women from the 50s to sort of look for evidence as to where they were placed in this sort of argument. And he's arguing that the sort of high-end audio hobby was more of a minority, but there's a lot of evidence to suggest that it wasn't. It was a multi-million-pound business. And he did suggest that if we look more at sort of mid to lo-fi technology, particularly radio, women and girls were very much engaged with listening. So this quote here is from that paper. And this is a woman, a single unmarried woman who had her day job and then came home and talks about in her diary, I would really like to go out to the cinema tonight, but I'm actually going to stay in and listen to this concerto. And then later on writes about, in that experience, I'm in the world of dreamland and music. So women were discerning listeners, they certainly were. But yeah, they were certainly depicted as not engaged with the more high-end stuff. And this is a picture from an advert from Pepsi. And what I've certainly found in all the stuff that I've looked at is that the depictions of men and women in these adverts are so completely different. Women are always sitting on the floor, lying on the carpet, in this sort of like dreamy state. And men are always sitting in a room, sort of the male listening room, very serious, very discerning. And this is an interesting one because it features both a man and a woman, which is quite rare. But of course the woman is sat down, what should I listen to? And being sort of, presented with the music from a man. So you might interpret it differently, but that's certainly what I get from it. Yeah, so moving on from that, another part of my research is very much about fidelity of sound, which has been an argument since the 1890s. And what you can see here is the 1915 Edison tone tests. So Thomas Edison was releasing his diamond disc gramophone, which was his disc version of the Berliner one, which had taken the world by storm. And he conducted these tone tests where people were presented with a female vocalist singing unaccompanied and then a gramophone recording of the same performance. and they were asked to say which was which. And the overarching result was that they couldn't tell the difference. However, they've been very much primed to expect that. I mean, the marketing that went behind this was incredible, and is something that's still used to this day by stuff like Master for iTunes and things like that. So, please note that it's certainly all male. The listening bias that I referred to earlier, it's an all male listening group, white males, which has huge implications for applicability. And even as recently as 1976, I managed to dig out a paper by McFadden and Passanen, which suggested that homosexual women had different autoacoustic emissions than heterosexual men, and that was the reason for their sexual preference, which is obviously complete nonsense, I'm sure you would agree. We know that differentiating factors in terms of hearing are mainly to do with age and exposure, so this was complete nonsense. And unfortunately, as recently as 1990, Moving Picture Experts Group, who developed what we now know as the MP3, all of their development tests were on white European men. So there's a huge listening bias at play here with massive implications for what we now perceive as a sort of sonic baseline. And I just threw this in because I like this this thing from, again, High Fidelity magazine. Like, for me personally, I've been in the music industry since I was about 15, and I have never heard anyone use the term sound woman. It's always sound man, ask the sound man, where's the sound man gone? And it's just, yeah, I've just got to throw that in. So I'll move on to something that's a little bit more, I guess, philosophical. I really like this picture because it's a female workforce working with like a huge product that obviously sold millions and millions and still continues to sell millions. And some people talk about physical records as like a storage container, like I talked about initially what Will Straw said. So a storage container for music that we then receive music through. And Mumford in 1966 said that container technologies are neglected in history and philosophy of technology because they're actually coded as something feminine. And Sophia in 2000 took this further and talked about sort of misogynistic metaphysics that has perpetuated space as a passive neutral receptacle. And she argues that such container technology is a sort of anti-maternal bias that devalues the technology as such. And I think that's really, really interesting because it's a technology that is so, as I've demonstrated, is completely marketed to men. But there's this sort of undercurrent of it's a container technology, it's maternal, it's somehow devalued. So I just thought I'd really be interested in people's thoughts on that. So where are we at now? We're in year 2017. Surely things have moved on. Things have moved on in a lot of other respects. Where are we at in terms of this? Well, the good news is yes, things have moved on to a certain extent. In terms of the vinyl resurgence, a lot of sort of entrepreneurial people have started record stores as a result of this, and a lot of these entrepreneurs are women, which is great. And I've put in a quote from Lauren Reskin, who runs Sweat Records in Chicago. And she said, "We had to fight for respect from people who dismissed us based on our gender." And she talks about male customers coming into her store and ignoring her because they'll immediately look for a man to ask for advice from. And she's also reversed the flip side of going into a store and being ignored, because why would she be in there? She lost. So yeah, that's a really prevalent dialogue in terms of the record store experience. I've put in a picture of Megan Page, who is the coordinator for the UK Record Store Day. I'm sure we've all engaged with Record Store Day at some level. It's kind of unavoidable. And the good news is, in the US, the coordinator is also female. So yeah. And I've also put in a picture of Maria Stamper, who's also known as the Black Madonna. And she won DJ of the Year last year by Mix magazine. So, and she uses vinyl as her instrument. That is like her core instrument. So in terms of women engaging with this technology, yes, there's plenty of women doing really well out of it. In terms of like my own experiences, I wrote a blog for the RMA on my own experience within this field and as a researcher in this field. And the bad news is I've had quite a lot of really bad experiences. For instance, went into Rough Trade West in Notting Hill the day after Record Store Day, and had a sort of very informal chat with the staff there about how Record Store Day had gone. And one of them just happened to say, well, you know, it's a real, you know, it's a boys thing, isn't it? And I was like, oh, why would you say that? That's interesting, and sort of pushed on it. And they didn't know what to say. They ended up, you know, I pushed, and they said, oh, I don't want to offend you. And I was like, right, okay. So, yeah, it still exists. And one of my friends in the music industry is a transgender male and has experienced the music industry as both, I guess, female and male, and says that the difference in how he's treated is ridiculous, but he also only has to pick up a copy of NME and it's there in black and white. It's just a little bit more subtle than what I've shown today. So yeah, if you're interested in about my own experiences, you can read that. In terms of the pilot research that I've conducted, these are all the sort of stores and record labels that I've worked with so far. And yes, they've all been male subjects so far. Talked about the Rough Trade example. Sister Ray in Soho in London talk about, I asked them who their consumer is now, and they said it's everyone, male to female, aged 14 to 94, every nationality. And I was like, oh, that's great, but certainly when I'm in that store, that's really not the case. And Veronica Scrimshaw, who works at Liverpool Hope University, I've been having a sort of dialogue with her about this, and she says, you're absolutely right, but I get really pissed off when people argue that, you know, women don't collect records and aren't engaged with this. Because the truth is, they are, but they just don't want to go into these places because of things like I've described, you know, a rough trade. So that's a really strong argument for that. So, covered quite a lot. Is this medium of music gendered? I would argue absolutely it is. And just sort of to conclude, I feel like, I mean, certainly the theme of this conference as well, I feel like it fits in really well with that, because really why I'm doing this is because until we can create, you know, a safe, sort of comfortable space for everyone, and I don't just mean male, female, non-binary genders, by class and race, absolutely everything. Until we can do that, I think we've got a lot of work to do. So, yeah, I'll conclude on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You finished quite early, so
okay.
We have a little bit of time for questions. I have a question, but I'm going to go last in case there aren't any questions.
I've got a really very simple question, which is there any way you could do any research on record buying online?
Yes.
Because if the places are toxic, which they clearly are,
yeah.
then are women simply doing their record buying on Amazon or through the
the answer is yes, they are. Yeah. Places like Discogs have taken off massively, and yeah, that is something I'm trying to get the data on by gender if possible. I don't know if to collect that data when people buy, but yeah, that's absolutely, and it's one of these things that, you know, everyone talks about how the internet's democratized the world. I guess it has in terms of consumption as well. Yeah, I'd be really interested to hear other people's experiences in record stores.
I just wonder, do you know Jonathan Stern's work?
Yes, yeah.
I just wonder in terms of when, I mean, I having worked in a record shop and on record labels, I have no doubt that this is, you know, no doubt that this is true. Lots and lots of levels, although that I know a lot of women. So I think that when you go into women in specific areas, like specific musical areas, you will find women buying records.
Yeah.
You know, record store day. I'm kind of interested in the way that records are fetishized, and certainly this the new resurgence of vinyl appears to be a great success in comparison to basically a massive unit value drop of music because of, you know, and that's a whole other argument. But I also feel like this is very white, you know, this is a very kind of white, racist sort of conception that's very much set from a hierarchical position of classical music again. So if you look at diaspora communities like the West Indian communities and the place of record shops in Finsbury Park or Tottenham or Brixton during this period were massively important spaces and often started out not as record shops per se. They were records being sold in corner shops, which mimics the experience of black music that was sold across America, not in record stores but in general stores. And there is a counter history to this that is very significant and totally impacts on what we understand to be modern British music. And so if you look at it just from a high fidelity, all you're seeing is a specific white middle class classical music version, and I would argue that there is a massively contestable history there that you can see and map in Cardiff, in Bristol, in Manchester, Notting Hill, you know, and rough trade, you know, the kind of community of Notting Hill Gate, if you look at that in terms of like Honest John's, you know, there's always been women working at Honest John's behind the counter. There's been women working at rough trade. There are women working at rough trade. I mean, Sister Ray, I know people work at females that work at Sister Ray. So I don't think that they're, you know, I mean, I am absolutely sure they are not exclusively male spaces. Even if I would say to you, it's similar to going to a mechanics. There's more women in record shops than there are working as mechanics. So we were talking yesterday about gendered technology, and I agree that technology is gendered. I think that's true. But I think you have to include the counter histories. You have to include the relationship between sound and its social experience, and how vinyl. I think the idea of vinyl as a carrier, or any of these formats of carriers, reproduces that women are carriers. Women are the holder of the next, you know, so, and if you don't include their process of social reproduction, you lose the nuance of that situation, and I think it's more nuanced than that, and absolutely the man shift, the back cave, all of those things, that men take space and women exist in it. I think those things are absolutely true, but I think also there are counter narratives to that are really important.
Okay, great, thank you. Thanks.
I had a quick comment about the data. I don't have the data to hand, but I think there is already evidence that women are downloading music apps and music sharing apps in greater numbers than men.
Okay, great.
So you might want to dig around with that. I had a question, and I'm not a historian at all, but I wonder if you have thought about, there seems to me to be a shift on music making in the home from, let's say, the 19th century into the 20th century. So stereotypically, the 19th century, it was sort of the mother of the household playing the piano and maybe the children standing around listening and learning. And then you go into the 20th century and you've got the father of the household, or the man in the household, with the piece of technology and the loudspeaker, and the two loudspeakers even, or the headphones, and there's not a, it suddenly becomes male shifted into the male domain, and I don't know where, is it the technology that's done that, do you think? Is there something else going on in society?
Well, I think that's privatisation of music. I would say that that's what happens when the further music becomes privatised and taken away from that social experience, the more you get, so we're totally excluded when we're walking the road with our headphones on. We're totally in an exclusion zone, and that's quite deliberate, and I think that I'd argue that neoliberal capitalism wants you to be excluded. Quite so, take your headphones off and make noise in public is what I'd say. But I think that those things are very, very significant.
Yeah. But at one point the piano was the musical technology. It was a new music technology, and then it came into the home and became
part of a social experience.
A familial experience, didn't it? And I just think, we may be at that point where our music audio technology is starting to become more widely shared and less of...
Yeah, and if you counteract that between going to church or going to a club or a Northern Soul club or something like that, if you start to look at what the social experience of, when Northern Soul was absolutely linked to vinyl, but it was a social experience. So what do we define as the real interaction with vinyl.
Yeah, that's certainly a definition that I'm sort of grappling with. And my friend's just finished a PhD on Northern Soul at BCU. And yeah, there's certainly a lot of interesting work.
Okay, we have to stop there.
Okay.
Thank you very, very much. Yeah,
Thank you.
really.
Yeah, there's also put my glasses on.
Dressed up.
It's so much better.
Dressed up.
I had to literally sell my house to get rid of the rent I had over 40.
Just to reiterate, we are online now using live streaming, so if you use the inclusive sound hashtag, you can ask questions there and I can answer or encourage other people to engage a little bit because it's an inclusive space beyond the room. So.
Check the sound.
Yeah. Just mute them on there.
Yes,
We'll get a bloke.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To send me that.
So many of those.
Oh, great.
it was. Yeah, it's. This isn't sound coming out here, not PhD. If I root the voice down, I'll pick out something.
Can you send it through a file?
Because I'm not sending the sound to the HDMI, so it shouldn't. Still trying to get back to it.
Yeah, I think it's
I'm sorry.
This is a strategy.
Thanks very much.
This seems very complicated. Yeah.
And I got to sort of sound it.
Just felt like it was literally
Yes.
my father's.
Yeah, it's certainly unboxing video and stuff like that as well. Interesting.
You know, that shoe collection.
Enormous.
just as an
First
idea.
year,
Just
started
started
doing
doing
part-time at the
I used to work at Leeds College of Music and we had
It's the screen.
Louis Garcia.
and they had a big tower at a different institution that we were kind of contacted to deliver lectures. So I'd go into a room, there'd be like 90 guys sitting there, and there was a big table, and then there was a massive rack of equipment, a lecture room. It was amazing. It was like a studio in a lecture room, but I couldn't get anything on. I couldn't get the screen on. I couldn't get anything on. I was feeling hugely embarrassed, as these things do tend to make you feel, and then very self-conscious for obvious reasons. Woman standing here can't work the technology, and then I had to get help. 20 minutes later, a colleague very kindly came, and he went to this really innocuous button on the table, pressed it, and the whole thing got lit up. So I hadn't labelled it. But then when I came to work here, a very embarrassing situation happened because I couldn't get the same thing to happen. So I went to the innocuous button on the wall, and Stuart Worthy was standing there. And I pressed it, and the screen started coming down. That's not what I meant to happen at all. And he's standing there grinning politely, as if to say, like, who are we employed? You know, who is this person? She didn't know how to do anything. It just really, it ricochets, it ripples into your life, and makes you think, got to do the right thing. Anyway, I sympathise. These are not labelled in any way, and one of them doesn't work. So
It's, having experience of multiple universities, I can tell you that it's not unique to here. That it's not labelled.
to be fair, if I read everything here, I probably would. Right, Hallie, I'm going
Just
to
realised what the sound problem was, but never mind.
Hallie, I'm going to let you introduce yourself. So
my name is Hallie Santimas. I'm a an independent artist and researcher, so I do work within universities. I'm a technician, believe it or not, another university, and I teach a little bit here as well. So my main work is in sound and photography, installation art. So I try and create immersive spaces using sound and photography, and I'm particularly interested in the temporal effect that has, so the way that you experience time in those spaces. So that's particularly focused on this idea of something I call the space between, which is this idea of a transcendent space in between sound and photography, which I'll elaborate a little bit more on later. So this paper is basically, the idea of this is just to try and look back on some of the work that I did for my PhD project, which was about this space between, and try and figure out how my queer identity has filtered into that, because to me it was quite obvious it had, I just wasn't sure how. So the paper, oh, hang on, no, that's the wrong note, I've done that. So the paper mostly focuses on the final piece that I did for my PhD project, which is a piece called Escapism, which was kind of taken from sort of experiences I had growing up, going on walks to try and get away from all the horrible things that happen when you're young and queer. So it's split into kind of three, it's like a triptych, so there's three versions of it. This is the third one. For some reason, I don't know why, I've done it backwards. So I think you see the second one later. But anyway, so this is the third iteration. Each iteration uses the same pool of materials, and they are processed in different ways, depending on which atmospheres or which memories I'm trying to get across. The sound, or the images are multiple photographs which have been processed and layered. So the final images are not so much a photograph as a sort of almost like a piece of music. It's lots of recordings layered up, or modern recording techniques. You know what I mean? Studio recorded music is often sort of several tracks layered on top of each other. I make the images in the same way. And the sound is sort of 5 or 6 strands of pre-composed sound, which are then sort of constructed and then sort of infinitely reconstructed at random by a max patch. So you never quite hear the same sort of construction of the piece twice. So this is hopefully what it sounds like. See. So that's again, that's the third iteration, which is probably the most sort of extremely processed version of the piece, to the point where, so for example, there were vocals in that. So, just an idea as to what I've done, maybe I'm not done. So I guess to start with, where do those materials come from? Is I think a quite important question to ask for someone like myself who spends a lot of time sitting in fields with a microphone. So for this, I kind of look towards Sarah Ahmed, who I know has already been mentioned by Pam a lot, but from a book of hers called Queer Phenomenology. She looks at the way that spaces are, or how people create spaces according to sort of the repetitive work that they do within them, and then how those spaces affect those people. So she looks at this guy Husserl, who supposedly invented this philosophical tradition of phenomenology, so how you experience the world, and looks at he describes his room at length, and he talks about a writer's desk and how he's got a pen near him and a paper to hand, and he can glimpse his wife moving past in the kitchen occasionally. There's some really good stuff in there, incidentally, about the work that women did to get that paper on that desk and things, but unfortunately I don't have time to go into that, but I highly recommend the book. So by creating this writer's space around him, he's shaping it according to his work, and it in turn is shaping him, because after all, if you're a writer, or if you're not a writer and you're in a writer's space, it's quite easy to be a writer. Using this idea of spaces which shape people and people which shape spaces, she applies this to sexuality and identity, and how this may shape people in sort of the wider world. So she talks about straightness as a becoming. So the way that society pushes people to be straight. So she talks about it in terms of straight lines. So she argues that you're always pushed down a straight line, and on that line are things like marriage and reproduction, and things like that. And she borrows off Judith Butler, who talks about a field of heterosexual objects. So the world in the world we are surrounded by heterosexual objects. I mean, just for example, if you think about the home that you grew up in, there are probably pictures of family, pictures of relatives, pictures of babies, things like that, which are all very much sort of closely tied to big heterosexual institutions. So this repetition induces straightness. And yet, my favourite bit of the book, she talks about the straightness as a repetitive strain injury. Because she talks about the spaces contorting bodies to fit its shape. And as you form a queer identity, you kind of try and get out of that shape and try and leave this sort of line. So in my case, this the way that the spaces that I grew up in shaped me, I come from quite a privileged middle class background, and I grew up in a village, so for me, walking was an easy way to get away, because I could walk for 5 minutes and then I could see no one, which is quite nice for me. But also, the need to walk, the need to get away, also comes from my specifically queer background and queer identity. Getting Twitter notifications on my slides. It's weird. So at least it didn't come up on there. It's fine. So the materials that I've recorded, whether that's sort of the spaces that the spaces that I'm in, I've recorded inevitably because I am queer. I'm in those spaces because I'm queer, and in those spaces because I'm middle class, and I'm in those spaces because I've had the experiences that I've had growing up, which are obviously different to every single one of you, because you aren't me. So, so this is an image from the second iteration of escapism. They do come in pairs, but I put one. As you can see, this is not just an image of a space. This is, I hope, an image of place. It's not only do I kind of record these spaces, but I filter them through my sort of the lens and atmospheres. Is that left? Oh dear. Okay, I'll have to speed up. So they're filtered through my own queer lens and the way I experience the world. So hopefully, what I try and get across is atmosphere as opposed to just a recording of space. And therefore, kind of hopefully, it kind of cements that queer perspective. So if I showed you a picture of, I don't know, some grass, that would mean something different to you than it would to me. So I might have to skip forward. I should have spent all the time on the complicated bit, really. So I think the main way that this has really affected my work is through the way that it works in time. I mentioned that I'm really interested in this idea of transcendent space, I believe that this space is created through this push-pull effect of stasis and movement with sound and photography, which, again, I'm going to skip over this bit a little bit, but it's a paper written by Eleni Ekonyadu, which for some reason I didn't actually write down what it's called, but it's about a piece called Stimuli. She comes up with this idea of rhythmic time, talks about how rhythmic time can create its own temporality, so this idea of going between the perception flitting between two temporalities creates a rhythm, which then creates its own time. I argue that that is what happens with sound and photography. And something which always frustrated me when I first started my PhD was people going, why? Why are you doing photography? It doesn't work. It doesn't, the sound is moving, the photography is not, I'm bored. What's happening? And this would happen, I get this from people I really respected. So my whole PhD was kind of dedicated to writing down exactly why I felt that it did do these things. But, because to me it felt totally natural, this effect. I was like, how can people not realise this? Like, this is something that I really get on board with. And I couldn't figure out why. Let's skip all that. That's what I just said. So, fast forwarding to queer temporality. There's a guy called Jose Munoz who's written a fantastic book called Cruising Utopia, which is about kind of an idea of queer futurity. And he takes his, as many people do, his idea of queer temporality from Jack Halberstam, who talks about how time is ordered in a straight world according to, again, reproduction. The vision of the future is reproduction, and anyone who sits outside of that which obviously it's not saying all straight people are going towards that, but that's how society is reproduced through reproduction, therefore that is the future. And so queer time, you remove reproduction. Again, I'm generalising, but maybe we'll talk about some questions. You remove reproduction and suddenly queer time becomes potential, and it becomes defined by potential because the future is sort of a horizon, the future could be whatever. And for Munoz, he talks about queerness as something that has not arrived yet. So he says, queerness is essentially about the rejection of a here and now and an insistence on potentiality or concrete possibility for another world. So queerness exists in the future and for the future as an explicit rejection of the present. And so he talks about queer relations, sort of whether that's sort of interpersonal relations in a safe space, or sort of any way of sort of getting outside of this straight time, whether it's sexual relations, create these ecstatic transcendent moments, which are kind of interspersed between the present, or interspersed in the present, and the present is straight. And the present, talks about something which really resonated with me, about queers being failures according to straight time. He analysed a lot of art, again, I don't have time for you to go into it, and talks about how a lot of them deal with that failure and embrace that failure. So the here and now, for many queer people, is violence, is oppression, or tolerance at its worst. Whereas these ecstatic queer moments are potential. So queer temporality, I would argue, is a rhythmic temporality. The reason I think that I'm so interested in this push-pull of photography and sound is because it reflects how I feel I experience life, which is sort of bouts of frustration and depression, and feeling sort of like, sort of feeling like I don't fit in, with these sort of ecstatic moments where things are queer and anything seems possible. I guess I'll just finish. So I think I'll just with a small note maybe to say that that was all old work, and a lot of this work, a lot of that work I was concerned with escaping from the present, and I'd sort of accidentally creating sort of this idea of futurity in these sort of atmospheric worlds I was trying to create. I was never really doing it intentionally. And the only piece, and this is still not finished, so I can't play you anything from it. The only piece where I actually was really consciously thinking of sort of real life experiences in queer utopian ideas was this image. So again, I've not finished the piece, so I have no audio to show you, but that's just sort of something which happened. So after all, I did have an answer for those people saying, why doesn't it go? And the answer is, it doesn't go for you, and that's fine. It goes for me, and there will be many other people that it goes for as well. But you know, I'm failing according to what your thing is, and that's cool. so yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Really fascinating and quite moving as well. I do have one question on Twitter, which I'll ask hopefully for Lisa Colton. Don't be too nervous. It's actually from her kids. Because they're watching. You should say hello.
Hi, Lisa Colton's kids.
But first, a question from Laura. Pam. Your hand went up first. That's fine. According to convention.
I just want to say two things. There's an Aboriginal homeland community called Utopia in Australia, in Northern Territory. And I'm just going to say that I'm not speaking for myself, I'm not speaking for Indigenous cultures, but I know that knowledges, aspects of their knowledges, temporality is very special, very important to them. The present, the here and now, is infused with the past and the present. So when they sing or do any cultural aspect, the existence of heritage, elders, past people, present people, futures are in the moment. It'd be interesting to look at temporality from different cultural perspectives, just as a sort of a catalyst to thinking differently, not as a white middle class queer.
There's again, I could write a whole research project on this, but there is a chapter in the Sarah Ahmed book where she talks about this idea of queer temporality and how it affects her as a person of colour, and how it can work in sort of similar ways. But she talks about it in slightly different contexts and colonisation and stuff. And another thing in terms of art, Jose Munoz talks about queer art as taking the past and reshaping it, or sort of in the present, to create sort of a vision of the future. So
I love the images. You see the movement, you feel the movement. It actually it generates movement. Thank you. Fabulous.
Thank you.
I really loved your talk, and I got really excited, or I particularly liked when you talked about your own experience and this idea of straight time. And I work in educational projects with children and teenagers, and I was just thinking, like, yeah, that's totally true. When I structure workshops and everything, there's structure, and there's probably members of the workshops who are not comfortable in those straight times. I was just wondering, in your teaching work, or have you had any opportunity to work in a sort of educational way with looking at other queer time structures or temporalities, or with walking? Because I think walking could be a great educational tool. And
yeah.
If you haven't, then maybe.
I haven't with walking.
Yeah.
I actually read quite a good book about walking recently. The Verso released. I can't remember it was a French philosopher. But it was very sort of a philosopher who has the time and money to do lots of walking.
Yeah.
Which I don't have anyway.
Yeah.
But anyway, but in terms of teaching, I've never consciously thought about it, but it's more, as I've been doing this project, I've kind of been looking back at how I do teach and how I've realised sort of slowly, maybe conversations with other people who do teach, at least in higher education, that I teach sort of in slightly different ways. And one thing that I'm really keen on, and I have conversations about this, is the first thing I'll do with any students is for the first session, I don't want to talk about whatever is that end goal necessarily. I want to talk about what they do and what they're interested in, because I think it's something that, from what I've seen at least, is often neglected. And certainly, again, from my experience, there's a future laid out for you, and and that's not necessarily your future or the future that you want or fit into. And so I always try and work with the students to find what they enjoy the most. And I teach electronic music, so you often get a lot of people who are like, I'm a singer-songwriter, I'm not interested in this, how is this relevant to me? So, you know, I work with them to say, okay, well, here's some examples of singer-songwriters who have these electronics, and here's ways that we could sort of, we could work with your music to try to make it fit within this curriculum. So yeah, if that answers your question. So yeah, and I'm keen to try and encourage that approach more. I think because I've noticed students seem more enthused by it, and I've had people. I had a student who was really sweet actually. He requested me for his final year project because he had me for his second year, and he hated that module. He didn't get on with it. I think he nearly failed it in the first year, and he was just a few marks of getting a first in his second year. Because he realised, oh, actually, the hardcore music I like, there is ways to take what I like about hardcore music and use it in electronic music. And I was one of the only people that actually had tried to get him to provide the sound for instead. So yeah.
I'm going to. I know that Jo would probably want to jump in on that, but she can ask you better later. But I want to ask this question for Inez. It's a slight indulgence. Her kids want to know what the image at the beginning of the presentation was. There are some good guesses here. Now I've asked her what they are, but she hasn't managed to get back to me yet. So her kids are trying to work it out. Yes.
In all honesty, I'm not sure I could fully remember. But these pictures were largely, the vast majority of them were taken between Huddersfield and Slough, so I guess where they're familiar with probably, along the canal. So a lot of it's kind of reeds, grass. So, I can't remember exactly which, because there was maybe 20 images, and I used slightly different ones at different points, so, and they're all very similar images. So.
Thank you so much.
It's all right.
So, whilst Jude's setting up, we have. I keep looking at the clock. It's completely wrong. And I'm going to take it down as well. It's annoying me. It's annoyed me all year. Yes, time I smashed it. Smashed the clock. We have a conversation. I'm having a conversation. You're having a conversation with Alex at 11:10. So 11 o'clock. We'll try and finish quite on time because you have pastries, vegan pastries, waiting. And hopefully some hot drinks as well. Just 10 minutes, then we're back in conversation with her. To save time later, there's a book around, I don't know where it's got to, a bit like the wall yesterday. Whilst we're having that conversation, what I'd like to do is tear a piece of paper out. If you have a question that you'd like to ask her, what we'll do is we'll pull all the questions at the front, and then we can display them, and she can choose which one she resonates with. So we're not just come with battery asking her questions. She can pick and choose. And it's not just me asking the questions as well, it's a conversation. So, Jude. When you've got 5 minutes left, I'll do that. It's all yours.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. First of all, I'd like to say a little bit about me, just to put in context where I'm coming from, because I know we all come from different places. I started my undergraduate career in the music department, and then I worked clockwise around the lake at the University of York, and I went to linguistics and language, and then I took a detour to Dublin to do speech processing. Then I came back to York and ended up in the electronic engineering department, which is on the other side of the lake. So I've got a quite eclectic background in music, language, speech processing. That led me into singing and thinking about the singing voice and the analysis of singing voice. And now I've ended up in engineering, because that's where we teach music technology at York, or that's where we teach some of our music technology courses happen in the electronic engineering department. So having said that, and now you know a little bit about my background, there is a bit of data and there's some graphs in this presentation, because that's what I'm used to doing in an engineering department. But I'd like also to say a big thank you to Liz for organising this conference, because the bit of research, I say research, the bit of research that I'm going to talk about this morning is something that I don't at all get funded to do. Nobody pays me to do this bit of research. But it has been an interest of mine for a number of years, just by working in the audio field as an audio engineer and being involved in that sort of world. So I'm very grateful to you for putting on a conference that allows me to present this sort of stuff, because I'm not sure I'm ready yet to take it to maybe the Audio Engineering Society conference. Maybe next year. Maybe I'll feel brave.
I think the Audio Engineering Society are evolving.
Are they? Well, hopefully. I'll be there next year, guys, if anybody's watching. Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. So this is a title, and it was meant to be slightly provocative. And I don't mind if you shout rubbish as I go along. That's absolutely fine, because it may be. But I just started thinking, it actually falls on really nicely from my first presentation this morning. It's almost as if it was planned. About working as a woman in a heavily male-dominated world, and thinking. So, Karlyn, you were talking about users of audio reproduction methods, and I'm thinking about the makers of audio reproduction methods, and just what the makeup of those sorts of people are. This isn't working. So, a little bit of background. Actually, yesterday, I think it was Sally, you had a photo that I would love to have.
I'll send it to you.
Of this sort of scenario, but completely different. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just female faces. This is not uncommon to see on websites of music technology courses around the country, and I guess around Europe as well. Okay, we try a little bit harder at York, but this is not very uncommon. So I do a lot of teaching in music technology, and I teach acoustics, and I teach psychoacoustics. And I'm going to borrow your phrase, our sonic baseline. I'll send you the royalties later. The sonic baseline, yeah, of what we know about sound. And my research is into perception of sound, especially spatial sound. So this idea now that we have the technology to reproduce sound all around us. Yeah? Not just stereo, but all around us. And I'm very interested in how we do that and how people react and perform within virtual acoustic environments. So there's this sonic baseline, there's this body of knowledge about how we perceive sound, and it's something that's maybe taught in schools, it's taught in online courses, it's taught in universities, music technology courses, audio engineering courses. It's to do with some of the key ingredients of what we do as musicians and composers. So it's to do with pitch and timbre perception. It's to do with localizing sounds around us. So how do we know if something's behind, above us, to the side? How good are we at doing that? And it's to do with our perception of, as I say, just recently, we're moving from stereo to spatial surround sound. VR, virtual reality technologies are on the up again, yeah, maybe. And people are getting very interested in surround sound in cinema and in theatre. And it's to do with the range and acuity of our human hearing systems. Okay. However, I had a bit of a hunch that actually most of the participants in these studies that we've based our understanding of human perception of sound are male. Because actually when you look at it, you just need to look around you, I have to say this is the first conference I've been to where there's been a pretty much 50-50 gender split. I go to two types of conferences. I go to audio conferences, where I'm probably one of 3 or 4 women in the room, and I go to gender equality conferences, and I'm probably one of 97% of the room are female. Yeah? So this is a really nice breath of fresh air. But the female participation in the audio engineering industry and in audio engineering education is around about 6%. So recently, the Women's Engineering Society ran a Twitter campaign, 9% is not enough. I think we should have one, 6% is not enough. Definitely not enough. Okay? So probably, what we're basing our understanding of human sound on is actually understanding of male understanding of sound. Okay? And why is this important? Well, it impacts how we design loudspeakers. It impacts how we design headphones. It impacts how we do audio engineering, how we do live sound, how we mix things. It impacts how we build technology for home entertainment systems, theatre systems. It impacts music production. I guess I've covered quite a lot of things that we all work in this room. It impacts virtual reality technology that is becoming big. Things like Google Cardboard, Oculus Rift. You know, not only, if you're female, probably the headsets don't probably fit you, but actually what they're putting into your ears is maybe, I'm saying maybe not tailored for you. It impacts our need to provide realistic 3D audio. So much of virtual reality technology has been concentrating on the visual, the graphics, making the visuals right. And we at York now are starting to become experts in providing realistic 3D audio to match the images. Okay, so I thought, you know, in my spare time, because I say I don't get funded for this, I do a little bit of an investigation and see if my hunch about is there predominantly male participants in the listening test, the listening experiments, on which we base our knowledge of our audio perception. So it was only a hunch. But actually, if we think back to the history of stereo even, and it ties in with what you were showing. You were showing images this morning, so I thought I might play a little bit. So this is Alan Blumlein working in the 1930s, very early investigations into stereo. You know, Alan Blumlein had to do a very big marketing job on stereo. You know, people used to mono, they liked their one loudspeaker in the corner. Yeah. So stereo, this new thing. Oh no, don't want that. Is it worth paying for an extra loudspeaker? Well, yeah, you know, I'm going to show you. So here's a little clip. This is all fully available on the British Library website, which is absolutely brilliant. And I'll start about halfway through because it's quite long. And I just want you to listen out for any female voices.
Wesley, do you get that all right?
Yes, I'm getting quite well, yeah.
Good, excellent. Now, Jason, will you please change that over to reduce the amount of difference channel to 70 ohms, please? 70 ohms is the difference channel. Thank you. Now I'm coming over again. Still on 4x0. Coming right over again on 4x0. Coming over. Now putting over on B side. Should take a bit in first. Top, you get that all right? Thank you. Now I'm coming over, still on 4x0. Coming over again to the other side, coming over. I'm trying to keep the level reasonably constant. Wesley, do you get that?
Yes, quite well.
Right, and we all have a bit of single channel now. Single channel bit. Presuming you're over. Now doing exactly the same operation on single channel. Coming over again. Coming over again. On single channel. Do you get that all right?
Yeah, I get it.
Do you get that, Wesley?
Yes, quite well.
Right? You're now about getting to the limit of time. Would you go over to binaural again? I'll stay central. Now we're on binaural again. On full binaural. Single channel again, please. I presume you're over on single channel now. Now I'm over on full, on single channel. Now Tom, Dick and Harry.
It just goes out of the applies moment. Tom, Dick and Harry. That's what they're making audio for. Tom, Dick and Harry. I mean, if you're interested in stereo, you're interested in the technical aspects of actually how we reproduce stereo sound. These recordings are brilliant. But you know, where are the women? They're not there, are they? You know, that isn't a picture of Alan Blumlein. That's a picture of some of the guys at Bell Laboratories. But it's just a sort of example of the tradition of audio, the tradition of stereo, the tradition even now of spatial sound, or MP3 and these sorts of things. Okay. data. So I thought, okay, let's do this scientifically, let's do this a little bit more rigorously. So I decided to investigate the references of a recent review paper that was published in 2013. Okay, that paper itself, this is on spatial audio in particular, has 76 citations, and that's not a huge amount of citations, but actually in terms of the number of citations that audio papers tend to get is about right. But within that paper itself, there are 150 references, so there's 150 papers that the authors of that paper reference. So a good chunk of body of research. So I'll call this corpus A. Okay, what I did is I looked at those 150 references in this paper. So this is Spatial Sound of Loudspeakers and Its Perception, a review of the current state, and it's published in Proceedings of the IEEE. The references span from 1881 to 2014. But as you might imagine, there's only one reference from 1881 and one reference from 1934, and the bulk of the papers span 1953 to 2014. I checked for evidence of perceptual testing. Okay, not all papers referenced in that review paper included any perceptual testing, so there's quite a bulk of papers that were about mathematical modelling or the actual engineering, and they didn't involve any human testing. So I went through each paper where I could. I managed to get most of the papers online. I think there was one paper I couldn't get hold of. And I looked for words such as test, or participant, or listener, or subject, or method. I got quite desperate sometimes. Anything at all, you know, did you test it at all? And I noted, if it had been reported, the number and the gender of participants. So, here are some results. In Corpus A, over 50% of the references, over 50% of those papers don't specify the gender balance of the test participant group. So that's 16 out of 34. There were 34 papers where testing, listening tests were reported. Where the gender of participants is reported, over 3/4 of those test participants are male. Now it strikes me that people are probably reporting the gender of participants because it's quite unusual to have female participants, so it's sort of reinforcing that. However, none of the papers cited actually refer to the effects of gender, so they don't use it as one of their variables in any statistical testing. Okay, here's an eye chart, you all like pie charts. So in 16 papers, the gender of participants were not stated, but 7 of them were all male participants, so their participant group was all male. Surprisingly, no participant groups were all female. Okay? I say surprisingly, but not that surprising maybe. And there were 10 references where there was a mix of gender. Okay. So 33 papers included perceptual testing or listening tests. Overall, that means there were 493 participants, which results were reported in different papers. Just over 50% of them, the participants' gender is not stated, but we've got 195 known male participants and only 48 known female participants. So that's not a balanced set. Okay, it's probably why, to be honest, nobody's reporting on the effects of gender, because you can't really say anything statistically valid about, you've got 3 female participants and 18 male participants. Okay. Just quickly, this is a histogram to show where people are starting to report the gender of participants. It's really since 1970. I'm sorry my years have got decimal points on them. I couldn't get rid of that. Google slides. Anyway. But the majority of these papers where we do know about the gender are from the year 2000 to 2010. So it is starting to happen. Okay. So why is there this disparity? Why is there this imbalance between male and female participants? Well, much of this sort of research is being undertaken in physics departments, engineering departments, audio engineering, music technology departments, And most of it is in UK, US and German universities, and those are all heavily male-dominated spaces. And pragmatically, researchers doing this type of work are just calling on their friends, their colleagues and their students. Yeah? So it's sort of, you know, not surprising that we end up with this imbalance. So that's a picture of a Eurasian eagle owl. Apparently they're very difficult to tell male from female of this owl species. In fact, there's one at the national, what's it called, the national, I don't know the name of it, Bird of Prey Centre. That for 20 years they thought was male, but it was actually female. Anyway, so what? Maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe our perception of sound, whether a male or female, is just the same. Okay. However, there is a physiological aspect to our perception of sound, and physiologically, male and female are different. Because actually, the shape and the size of our head and our ears influences how we hear. But also, a lot of our perception of sound is about learned abilities, learned preferences, where we learn to, you know, what we've been doing, what we're used to, activities we're used to undertaking. And there have been other differences in gender found in other perceptual areas, such as perception of pain and such as spatial ability. Okay? I think the jury is still out on quite a lot of that research, and I'm not saying that I agree one way or the other with any of that. So I was a little bit depressed after I did all that, and I thought, actually, no, somebody must be getting more interested in this. I found this other paper, and they actually had a section, it was yay long, on gender, age and hearing loss, yeah? Where they looked at 9 papers, and I'll call this Corpus B, and the papers are on the end slide if you want to see them. So these are papers where they have actually started to look at gender differences in hearing. Okay, so I'll whiz through this really, really quickly, but you can have a look at the slides later. So these 2 sets of authors, they found that there was no difference between male and female in terms of ability to localise sound sources around. Okay, so lots of loudspeaker testing, point to the source, or usually point the gun to the source. Not sure that one. These 2 sets of authors. So this is a really small data set. This is 4 people. This is like your family. I don't know. This is 55. You know, with a balanced data set. So you know, we're making some progress. They found that actually there were some small gender-related differences between discrimination of interoral time difference and interoral intensity difference. And this is 2 of the things that allow us to know where sounds are in space. Okay, so some small gender differences. And 2 more sets of authors here. Again, fairly small sets of participants, but better than some studies. They actually found that localizing sounds within space, that male listeners were better overall, so more accurate, in especially in noisy environments, so what's called the cocktail party effect. And female listeners were less accurate in judging the time of arrival of a moving sound source. So this is where you get sort of moving sound source, and then it stops, and you have to say when it's going to sound, when it's going to arrive there. So it might be a car, and then you have to guess when it's going to be there, point to it and sort of indicate. Female listeners were less accurate. They tended to underestimate. It's like, yeah, let's underestimate everything, don't we? Okay. And 2 more papers found some small differences in a left side, left brain side, left hemisphere of the brain, so a right side advantage for listening for males and a left side advantage for listening for females. Okay. So this is interesting stuff. However, it's a really small corpus at the moment. It's just 9 papers that have been that I've been looking at there. So again, we're tending to get more gender-related differences starting from about 2003 onwards, and a more of an interest in finding a gender-balanced group of participants for listening tests. So what next? I think I've shown much of our sonic baseline. 90% of it doesn't consider gender differences at all, and has actually been based on mostly a male participant database. So does our understanding of audio perception, so the sort of thing that I teach to undergraduate students, does it hold true for all of us? Okay. What can we do about this? Well, maybe we need to start replicating some of those previous studies. You know, there's a big drive towards reproducibility of research. So maybe we could take one of those seminal papers and reproduce it, and try and ensure a gender balanced participation. Let's just see. There may not be a difference, but until we have that, we've done that research, we can't say there is or there isn't. And let's get over this. So, well, I just picked some students and they were the only people I could bribe with chocolate and they all happened to be there. It's not my fault. Collaborate with colleagues. So the corpus B, the small corpus of 9 papers where they did manage to get a gender balanced group, they tend to come from audiology departments, psychology departments, health sciences departments. So we need to work across disciplines as well. Yeah? So not siloed in our little engineering departments. Reach out and work across disciplines. Those are the 2 review papers, and that's corpus B if anybody wants to look them up later. Thank you very much for your attention.
Hi, I know we're at tight for time, and that was really interesting. I found myself thinking about, oh, wow, the speakers that I have at home are designed based on, you know, what a man thought. Okay, so for me, listening is quite a social practice as well. So I know that we talked a lot about I can't remember the exact word you used, was it
physiology?
Yeah. Physiology. And I think we're striving towards looking at things quite intersectionally. I found this very binary, and I'm wondering if for future research there are differences considering the gender spectrum, non-binary listeners, and the effects of all of these experiments. So we talked at the end about, you mentioned about replicating experiments, and I think that, I just wanted to say that I think that's definitely a direction that it needs to go in, and I'm sure you've considered that.
You know, I'm fully aware gender is non-binary.
Yeah.
However, in most of these papers, if gender was mentioned at all, then it's definitely male and female.
Exactly. So I think just anything that progresses forward from this point, I think already at this point, intersection.
Just on the intersection, I did the slush, which is a huge tech fest in Finland, mental thing. And what was interesting is incredible. What was interesting there was virtual reality porn, and this is where you do see a new intersection of difference coming in, and that new investigation is, number one, uber tech savvy. I haven't got a clue what they were talking about, and it makes me sick putting that thing on. I'll try, but I'm not good at it. However, what was very interesting about them is, like, kids from LA who like sex cells. They're gonna do it. They were definitely wanting the money. You know, that was their thing. But they're very, very interesting in exploring the sensual nature of all stimulation in a pornographic virtual reality thing. And although that might go, but actually, in terms of investment and in terms of getting it, because I just thought there is a research project in that we can get funding for, because the industries of entertainment and pleasure dominate the money vibe. So if you say this is for gaming, this is for bringing more women into the gaming atmosphere, we can get money for that. No. Yeah. Sat there like a tree.
That was really interesting. As you know, I've shared experience with the audience. I'm actually, at the moment, I'm doing perceptual experiments, and I'm struggling to get male participants. Absolutely desperate. Mostly females. I think my students usually mostly females. I'm really interested in the playing of sports and skill. Because I've worked with physicality and sound performance in my work. And I know, it's sort of hearsay, but probably a couple of post-articles, and I saw something about VR systems and how sort of the female balance system tracks movement differently to male.
So people are calibrating their visual systems for VR environments, but then the woman puts on the headset and stuff and then moves around, they get motion sick much earlier.
That's what I
And it's like this really interesting idea about how. Oh, I'm really interested in like whether, you know, these things may not be essentials at all, but maybe like what I'm talking about yesterday, when we remove deaf children from music immediately, we remove certain people in certain gender categories from, say, sports, you know, playing with balls, things like that, where we're tracking movement, and there's a lot of innate stuff going on there that people are maybe just learning, and it's not to do with being born male or
very interesting.
Yeah, it would be,
and I think in one of the studies I referenced towards the end of the presentation, they say on the whole, the female participants were less accurate at localizing sources. And then sort of in brackets, apart from those who did lots of sports, and they were really accurate. So, you know, there is always this interplay between gender and also what we do, and, you know, the brain isn't hardwired. And I think there's a lot of evidence to show that it isn't hardwired, and actually what we do on a day-to-day basis feeds into what our brains are good at doing. Yeah,
and
be good at doing something that you do a lot of.
If we're gender selected in education, that maybe our perception has been affected in some way, and then maybe we're less likely to consume VR games because, you know, we've been sort of streamed off into them. So yeah, it's really interesting. I'm just one minute. Sorry, yeah, you were going to ask another question.
No, I just it's really good. I just think that science thing drives me mad because I'm always saying that. You end up looking at those studies and there were 7 people, and they're saying 100% of the study. You're like 7 people. That's not, you know. But you know, science has got a lot to answer for.
Some of them actually, you can always find any evidence testing. They say, this has found this. You go, well, how do you know? You're not telling me that you tested anything, and then you sort of worry that it's actually, you know, the person who put it together just tried it on and went, oh, yeah, sounds fine to me. Excellent. I think it is changing. I don't think you can write a paper like that now and have it published where, you know, you're talking about perception, you haven't done any perceptual testing, but it's just reminding people, you know, unique diversity in the participant group, and it ties in with this drive towards more inclusive engineering as well. So the end users should be part of the engineering and design process, and not just sort of tagged on to the end. And so that's a hope for the future.
Joe, I know you want to ask a question, but I'm really sorry.
Fine.
We only have half a right. I watched the pastries arrive, so I know they're here, and you can have yourself a tea and coffee in the atrium, and then we're back in there with
Are you? Oh, marvelous. We got some of the real thing down here, I think. So I've seen a little while. I'll be here.
It's so big.
Yeah, and I was just like, yeah, no, like, so actually, like, she's always I wonder how much of it is.
You can write your
No.
I'm about to leave.
Facebook,
in London.
Yes. Yeah. So, I would say it should work on both in theory, but uni Wi-Fi is the universal main Wi-Fi thing. That didn't let me earlier. Yeah. 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 Well, for me, it's like, I don't have my student login, which is expired.
Okay. Oh yeah, I might do what I said in Germany, like.
Oh no, it's fine. I told you yesterday. Like, it's fine. Yeah, don't worry about it. I understand. Yeah, I had. It turned out I had 5 minutes less than I thought, which I think was just because it was slow running. So I skipped over a lot of the heavy detail, and made a lot of generalizations, which I didn't get to qualify. But never mind, it was fine. Well, that's the stuff that's easy to talk about quickly.
Very old.
I hope so. It's thank you.
I've only named it for a week.
Right.
Well, if I'm in Berlin, I'll let you know.
Are you next to Finland?
Yeah, I know.
I'm more comfortable with that.
It's a good way. They're showing us, I'm sending that to my friend.
I actually
have.
you two together.
Oh, yeah. He left American Paris. The media. You look great. So this shows that you're from the north and not from Brighton, so I say that to some of them.
Okay, keep that pose. Ready? And again. And smile a bit more.
Yeah, I've actually got a change of shoes on my back because these are slightly small. But if I've got the bigger size, I've been way too big. And I love them too much to not have them. So I always, if I wear them for long periods of time, I always put those shoes in my bag so I can change out of them after a while before my feet get
They probably don't get trashed because on Facebook, I'm on Facebook, so I think gold shoes. Facebook is the best of gold shoes. That's the thing, just find me on Twitter.
That's smaller than gold.
Right, find me. On Facebook, I'm Sally A. Ross. And on Twitter, I'm Sally Sharp. Find me because then I want to do that thing. This is acquired skills. That'd be brilliant. That was brilliant.
Thank you. I
So many
skip over a lot of
things to tell
details.
you,
Yeah.
talk to you about. Yeah, there's just not enough.
Well, I have
I was tweeting the other day, my son sent me a tweet going, how much of your experience? The tweet is stop. And then he tweeted, I should have taught you, but I didn't.
Yeah, just sort of the things changes how you
Anyway, lovely to meet you all. Yeah. Really inspiring.
Good luck with your stuff too.
Yes.
Go and change the world, Sally. Go and have another Occupy. Yes!
I'm going to get pastries. Sounds like a really good product.
Where are you? I'm at York actually. I'm not in Jude's department. I'm in the here from the TV department. Do you know Isabella at York? I think she's on the University of York. I think she's the other one. Oh, Sir John. Yeah.
And she's in education. She's in music therapy.
Yeah.
I'm sure she'll help you.
Yeah. Yeah. No. I'll look for her. Yeah. Do.
I mean, she's. In fact, I'll just introduce you via email.
Yeah.
Because it's quicker to bring her up. And she's quite interdisciplinary, and because she take up the York's job. Okay, yours.
I'm Fiona.Keenan.
And I'm also doing this because I'd like to dot.
It's K-double-E. And then at York.ac.
We're missing the best pastries, but it's okay.
York.ac.uk.
AC.uk. Okay, if you're okay with this, I'm going to copy in this person who's she's in her final year. She's doing a professional doctorate in ED, and her name is Sarah Upjohn, and I mean she's phenomenal in that she's in her third year. She got keynotes invites which she went to in Malaysia because people that are interested in expert training, like sports people and expertise in music, they share the whole business of practice and repetitive strain injury. And she gets these keynotes because she's engaging with the hardest nut to crack, which is to change practice, to get Russian pedagogues. Sorry to say about Russians, but there's a lot of them at the Purcell School who have they just want people to practice 4 hours a day, 5 hours a day. And we've got lots of research that says you shouldn't do that, especially children, who are kind of in crazy sort of positions in a rehearsal with a conductor who's making them practice, stay, hunched over a double bass for 2 hours. So there's something.
I think there might be some
interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary research that would bring, because you're not going to get all these